NUS, National Union of Students, has a new president, and there has been a lot of controversy about this young woman and some of the positions that she has taken or allegedly taken. And I want to talk a bit about this. I've been involved in a few of those debates, and there's a few thoughts that I think need to be put out there. To international viewers, the British National Union of Students is a pretty influential organisation insofar as I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's certainly, I think, unique in Europe in terms of its scale. I don't think there's any other European country that has such a nationwide connection of students as the NUS does as a body. So whoever becomes president of the NUS is in a pretty prominent position, and several NUS presidents have went on to become prominent cabinet ministers in government. Um, I believe Jack Straw, the former Home Secretary, had at one point been NUS president, unless I'm mistaken. But certainly it is a gateway for aspiring politicians to make their mark. Student politics in the UK can be quite brutal insofar as it's an environment where young people are together and they're finding themselves, they're developing themselves and their own ideologies, and very often that clashes in a way that is even more intense than full time Westminster politics. Um, I've made a video about the NUS in this environment of what I consider to be neoliberal or hard left intolerance, and I still have those concerns, which is precisely probably the main reason why I've resisted suggestions to go back to university, because I don't want to be in that sort of an intolerant atmosphere. Everything I hear about the NUS strongly suggests that. Now, I want to touch on a controversy that surrounds this new president. There's a few controversies actually, and a few of my thoughts on that. Um, so the new president is Malia Bouattia. Apologies if I'm pronouncing her name wrong. She's 28 years old, of Algerian descent, and as I understand it, she studied at the University of Birmingham. That's the university she's aligned with, and she became leader a few days ago. This has attracted significant controversy because in 2014 there was a motion that was put forward by a Kurdish student at Strathclyde University to condemn the actions of ISIL. Of course, at this time, ISIS was particularly barbaric. It still is, but this is when those reports are really circulating about aid workers being beheaded, the organization throwing gay men off buildings, enslaving women, and so on. And the world was basically united in revulsion at what this group was doing, and still is. Um, so when what happened basically when this motion to condemn ISIS was brought forward, um, she then basically tabled a counter motion to put this on hold or to amend it. She took issue with, in her view, the wording of the motion. According to Ms. Bouasha, the motion's wording was reckless because it was basically condemning all Muslims, sort of tarring them with the same brush as the action. That's her official line on this, and that is what she has said in the Guardian newspaper today, as an explanation for why she wanted an amendment to the motion. It has to be said that the motion did then go forward. It passed. It was an amended motion condemning ISIS, and it passed. Now, at the time, media reports were very much critical and along the lines of NUS refuses to condemn ISIS. Now, I've got a few questions about this. First, I'm curious, and anyone who's a student or a member of the NUS can maybe enlighten me on this because I honestly don't know. What is the timetable of a motion like this? What I'm curious about is, was this amendment and was this redrafted version, was that before or after the media criticism? Now, if this was afterwards, then it is quite plausible that they only put forward another motion to kind of appease media criticism and say, oh, look, but we are condemning ISIS. With before, then it has to be said that the media has been guilty of distorting this and distorting her own position personally. Her supporters have been very defensive of her and said this is one big witch hunt and she's been horribly misinterpreted as an ISIS sympathizer. And she herself says that her family and herself have been threatened by cyber trolls. Now, I condemn that no matter what, no matter who the person is. I think it's wrong, and if that is the case, I absolutely condemn that. No one should have to put up with that. However, her explanation for this is still very vague. She is simply saying that the wording was problematic because it was Islamophobic, but she isn't actually specifying what the wording was. So she's saying that the wording was attacking all Muslims, but she is not specifying what that was. I haven't seen the original draft. So how can we just take her word for it and say, oh, well, it was, that's reckless, therefore, yeah, they were right to amend it. Frankly, it's just her word and her supporters' word for that. Now, why is this important? It is important because here in the UK, there is a lot of this is about how people perceive what inflammatory language is. If that was a strongly worded draft that condemned ISIS in very strong terms, even colourful terms, but it didn't generalize all Muslims, I wouldn't have a problem with it, and I don't think that would be problematic. Now, if it really was a motion saying, oh, look, all these Muslims are terrorists, then I would totally understand why she would want to have that amended. But the truth is, we don't know either way. And until either she herself or one of her supporters produces that original draft, then I think they really don't have a great deal to go on. She also said in her Guardian article when it was worded correctly. Now, to me, that's a little bit arrogant. Worded correctly. Who gets to determine the correct wording? One of the things her supporters keep saying is that she's been democratically elected by the NUS. Well, as I understand it, and again, I'm not 100% sure about this, so maybe people can clarify the situation. As I understand it, it isn't every student who votes on the president, it's the executive committee of the NUS. In other words, if, as I have long been concerned about, the NUS is dominated by the far left, then no wonder they're going to elect someone who is like minded. She was elected, incidentally, by marginally marginally in favour of her nomination. I forget what the exact statistics were. It was relatively close, but comfortable enough for her to assume the position. Um, the other issue lies in her stance on Israel and Palestine, and she has repeatedly condemned the Zionist controlled media, as she puts it. Now, some have said that makes her anti Semitic. I actually don't agree with that. I think it's completely legitimate to criticize Zionism as a concept and the state of Israel. And I do agree that sometimes people confuse the two. So they automatically will say, oh, you're condemning Israel, you're condemning Zionism, you must hate Jews. Well, that's not true. On the other hand, there are those who will use that as a pretext for genuine anti Semitism. And both issues are real. Um, so, what I'm going to say about this is that it is possible that the media has been somewhat irresponsible about this. And I do think that when tabloids are running headlines like, new NUS president is an ISIS sympathizer, that's categorically reckless. And that can be construed as unfairly vilifying her. On the other hand, I think she can clear this up simply by showing a copy of the original motion to say, look, this was Islamophobic. It was condemning all Muslims. That's why I wanted it amended. No one has so far done that. So we only have her word and her supporters' word for that. But like I say, that's all down to personal opinion, how something is perceived to be. How can she say, just believe me, that's what it was, without people seeing what it was? So, in my opinion, she could have cleared this up pretty early on. And the NUS itself could have avoided the controversy by, responding to the media at the time and saying, look, we did pass a motion condemning ISIS. So I think the NUS has sort of dug its own hole with this. Look, I understand the tabloid press, especially, can be utterly reckless, and I'm no fan of the tabloid press. And if they have unfairly vilified her, and there is absolutely clear evidence that this has been a witch hunt, then yes, that is dead wrong and it absolutely needs to be condemned. But I also think she has made matters difficult for herself. I mean, being pedantic about an organization like ISIS and being pedantic about the wording, until we see that wording, there's simply no way to know. If it really was vilifying all Muslims, then yes, it is. It should have been amended, but I don't see that that has been the case because no one has produced that original motion. Um, Personally, I think the NUS is now a deeply, deeply anti-British organisation that will always find some sort of conspiracy in the state. The NUS has just come out and said that all police forces are institutionally racist. I mean, these sort of statements that the NUS comes out with, and these sort of positions are, I think, irresponsible. So, as an organisation, I think it's largely responsible for the own negativity that it currently has. Um, I think it is still a deeply intolerant organisation. I mean, the policy of no platforming is a huge problem. Saying that a certain person can't speak simply because they have views that certain people don't like. That's deeply intolerant. Surely universities should be a place of absolute freedom of expression. I just think it's a phony excuse to basically silence any controversial views. An example of that is Germaine Greer, who was no platformed because she said that transgender women don't have the experiences of real women, she put it. She was no platform for that. And what I take issue with is in this incredibly oversensitive drive where the professionally offended will say that they feel under siege and persecuted. Therefore, someone whose opinion they don't like is going to be no platform. I think that's nonsense. In other words, transgender people who don't like what Germaine Greer had to say, let her say it. Debate with her on it. But you don't change opinions, you don't win arguments simply by silencing people. And that's why no platforming is such a big problem. Now, if you get a situation where someone is outright calling for violence, which is what the no platform policy was originally about, I can understand that because students should feel safe on campus. But when it's simply a controversial opinion, that's a different matter. So when public figures who have contentious or politically incorrect views are going to address a university, then they should be allowed to do so, so long as they're not equivocally advocating violence. Incidentally, a few universities have threatened to pull out of the NUS because of this. So, summed up, it is plausible that the media, and I'll admit myself, have probably on some level blown this out of proportion. Um, Malia Bouattia says she herself has seen terrorism in Algeria, presumably when she was growing up during the Algerian Civil War, and she absolutely condemns ISIS. But the truth is, we are living in a time where perception is very, very important. Um, so, trying to amend a motion like this, it seems to me there is responsibility that falls on her and her supporters. She's now in a powerful position. So it seems to me she can resolve this immediately either by showing the original motion. Yeah, by showing the original motion. Is that is the whole basis of this issue. As for the Israel Palestine thing, I'm not so. That to me isn't such a big issue. Although I do think that if she advocates violent actions by Hamas or other groups active in the Palestinian territories, that is a major issue. Now, to be fair to her, she has said that she has personally met Jewish groups on her first day in office. So if that's the case, fair play to her. But these issues are very important, and I still think the NUS as an organisation has some big questions to answer in terms of the attitude it takes. Because the attitude it's taking right now is basically in order to show tolerance and in order to protect marginalized people, we're going to just shut down any other opinions. That to me is deeply misguided.